Hello and welcome to episode 169 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. On today's show, my good friend Maz will be back to discuss starting the process of deciding where to stay on a Walt Disney World vacation. This can be one of the most important decisions you will make about any trip, and sometimes people don't have all the information needed to make it. We'll talk about the considerations we both have when it comes time to book rooms for different lengths of visits. On property, off property, value, moderate, or deluxe. How does anyone decide with so many different options? Before we get started, there's been a lot happening in the world of Disney news. That's probably going to continue with the D23 Expo scheduled for August 9th through the 11th of this year in Anaheim, California. A ton of exciting announcements came out of D23 in 2019, but so many of them got delayed or downright canceled after the pandemic shutdowns impacted the plans for the parks. For the next few months, clickbait sites will try to anticipate some of those announcements. They may even be controversial. Earlier this month, there were leaks about changes to the DAS, Disability Access Pass at Walt Disney World and Disneyland. This includes bringing in a third-party company to decide which disabled people will be getting access in the future. For almost 3.5 years, this show has focused on inclusion. Everybody, and I mean everybody, should be able to enjoy the theme parks. We've had episodes of the podcast focused on survivors of abuse, people of color feeling more a part of the community, women feeling comfortable being themselves, and of course, we've had people on the show promoting fundraisers for the LGBTQ+ community, especially youth in the LGBTQ+ community. A lot of disabled and chronically ill people listen to this show and have been on this show. Most importantly, you need to know that the DAS system at Walt Disney World will be changing starting on May 20th of this year. If you are planning a visit, make sure you do your homework. While there will be day of registration, it might be beneficial to guarantee you have all of your T's crossed and I's dotted by doing it in advance. I know Disney will act like they aren't doing this to intentionally reject deserving guests, but it's logical to assume that they aren't hiring an outside company to give out more DAS passes. Please be prepared when having these conversations. No matter what, I think we can all agree that everybody who has been telling the truth about their disabilities to this point should continue to be approved for disability access passes. That is the bare minimum Disney should be striving to achieve. That being said, I wanted to address the toxic language and attitudes that permeated online when these changes were first rumored. One of the problems with the internet in general is people with no skin in the game playing devil's advocate against marginalized communities. This was sadly all too common a few weeks ago, especially on Twitter. Since they don't have to worry about being rejected themselves, it's purely an intellectual exercise for them. It is just a debate. They can create hypothetical boogeymen who do horrible things and not worry if their quest to find this proverbial needle in a haystack ends up making the parks unmanageable for our friends with disabilities. We have addressed this so many times. Not all disabilities are visible. Just because you can't tell why a person needs a disability pass doesn't mean that person doesn't need one. Invisible disabilities are just as valid as visible ones. If the only way you can manage the parks is with a DAS pass, I would rather wait an extra 5 minutes to ride Dumbo than force you to stay home. These trolls remind me of the people hovering over food stamp recipients trying to make sure they got the generic Honey Toasted-O's rather than Honey Nut Cheerios. I remember back in the summer of 2020 when Walt Disney World just reopened from the pandemic closures and there were no more fast passes. This meant that for a while, the only people using the fast pass lanes were people with DAS passes and a few select other special circumstances. Disney Facebook groups were filled with people screaming about how the people using the fast pass lanes didn't, quote, look disabled. Without a single day in medical or law school, they were all doctors, judges, jurors, and executioners. My disabled friends heard those whispers. Those kids hear those whispers and they internalize that. They can never feel, quote, normal because they're always forced to justify how and why they are different. Don't forget to be careful about how people word things. When the rumors started, most of these ableist accounts were talking about how the DAS system was being, quote, abused. They never said what they meant by abused. They never clarified. In situations like that, I always try to clarify in my takes. The troll knows what he means by the word abuse. Everybody can agree that people who tell blatant lies to get access to the DAS system are wrong, and that they are abusing the system. They use vague language to get readers to fill in the blanks. They say, abuse the system, and you hear, lied to get a fast pass. Then by the end of the week, you start getting the comments that some people just, quote, shouldn't go to Disney. They start telling people with disabilities to buy lightning lanes because in their opinions, disabled people should have to pay extra to get the same access. I am not perfect. I make mistakes no matter how hard I try to do the right things. It really makes me wonder how people can be so sure that they aren't doing anything problematic, that they can worry about whether that single mother in the Frozen Ever After lightning lane queue really could have kept her autistic 9-year-old from getting overstimulated for 75 minutes. Apparently, they never drive slow in the left lane or pass in the right lane. They always use their turn signals. They always dig through their pockets to see if they have $1 for a panhandler. I don't talk about religion very much on this show, but I try to live by the idea that nobody should judge the speck in somebody else's eye without taking a good, long look at the plank in their own eye. A few weeks ago, when I first addressed these things, I was humbled by the number of people who reached out to thank me. It really meant the world to me because the last thing I wanted to do was use up oxygen in a conversation when those with physical disabilities should be at the forefront. Still, we built up a sizable audience in the past 3 years, and I will always use my megaphone to amplify the voices of marginalized people, especially when online bullies are trying to keep them silent. I know how people with disabilities struggle every day to feel normal. Idiots on Twitter who claim it's all an act, or even worse, those who are jealous of people with life-altering ailments because they get on the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh a little quicker than other people, should just be quiet. This has nothing to do with you. Knock on wood, as of this recording, I have never needed a DAS pass, and I have never applied for a DAS pass. I am not saying that to brag because my health at this point in my life has been just as much luck as it has been my efforts. I'm only bringing up my health because I know the inevitable accusations will be that I'm being selfish and that I use it myself. Selfish people can only envision selfish motives from other people's actions. When they go low, we go tall. Do people lie? Absolutely. A person who is so morally bankrupt as to lie about being disabled to get a DAS pass will lie under any system that is created. That's on them. They know they are lying. The only person you have to live with 100% of the time is yourself. A liar will face his punishment 1,000,000 times in life. I understand being angry at the people who lie in these situations. That doesn't mean you make things harder for the people who tell the truth. That just makes more liars. All right, enough of that. Let's turn things over to the topic for this week. Maz, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to talk about a very underappreciated part of the planning process. That was a lot of alliteration there. Anyway, picking where you're going to stay, specifically on a Walt Disney World vacation, leads to a lot of interesting choices. So we're going to cover that. We're going to talk about how you've made that decision in the past, how you continue to make it. I'll talk about how I've made it in the past, And hopefully that will help as people try to plan their own vacations. Now, the very first topic is one that maybe you don't have a lot of experience with it, but whether you stay on property or off property. Now, Maz, you have not stayed off property for a Walt Disney World vacation. So, why do you find that you continue to choose to stay on property?
I think there's a few reasons. I mean, you kind of can't discount the the joy of being in the Disney bubble for your whole trip. There is something nice about kind of going on vacation and entering the Disney bubble, and that's where you stay. For me, a big perk of being on property is the resort transportation. I don't like driving in general. I especially would not like having to rent a car and navigate Florida roads. So for me, being able to wake up and take, a bus or a boat or a Skyliner or a monorail to the park each day is a huge bonus for me.
That is such a good point you make about the Florida roads because it is not just off property. It's not just like the locals will talk about I-4 and a lot of the traffic in the Orlando area, but even on Walt Disney World property, while you don't get a lot of traffic, what you do have there is confusing roads that aren't built to necessarily get you from point A to point B in the fastest manner. So it can be confusing to bring your own car to Walt Disney World and get to your resort and then get from your resort to Disney Springs and then get from Disney Springs to one of the parks. That's not as easy as the on-site transportation makes it seem. And this is a perk that has been diminished over the years. Of course, back when there was Magical Express that would pick you up right at MCO and take you to your Walt Disney World resort, and you literally got to stay within that bubble. You never had to leave Walt Disney World property after you left the airport. Now you have to do a little more of the legwork. If you're planning your own vacation, you have to make sure you get a shuttle. You have to pay for that shuttle. Not everything is done for you like it was in the past. In the trips you've taken since they've gotten rid of Magical Express, how do you feel the process has gone for you?
Honestly, I've been very lucky, knock on wood. The process has always been very smooth for me. I have certainly heard people's experiences where it's not gone quite so smoothly. Um, but, for me, it is really nice to not have to deal with Uber still. I know that, sometimes the Mears buses can take a little longer now that they're not like officially Magical Express. Um, but I often travel alone. So, I'm a young woman traveling alone and I often arrive late at night. And so there is a safety aspect that I have to kind of take into consideration there. And, taking the buses for me feels safer than getting an Uber alone at, 11:30 midnight.
A lot of times on the podcast, I talk about inclusion and wanting to hear from different voices in the Disney community. And I think this is one of the reasons that I wanted you to be one of my co-hosts from the very beginning, because you do bring a different perspective. I am a big dude. I mean, the name of the podcast is Tall Guy Talks Travel. I don't necessarily have to think about those things like getting an Uber and the safety precautions that I would have to take if I were coming in on a flight late at night. I would just do it. Now, I might be a little less likely to do it because of things like dynamic pricing, and Ubers can just be really expensive from MCO to Walt Disney World property. But this is just another example of why I'm so happy to have a bunch of different voices on the show, because I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, and again, if you're traveling alone, you're paying that whole cost by yourself. If you're a group of, 2 or 3 adults and you can split the Uber cost, then maybe it will average out to about what the Mears express price is. And that's about $15 for a one-way trip. And for me, $15, even $20 on mirrors is a whole lot cheaper than, sometimes I've checked it just for fun and an Uber would have been like $60. And I'm like, okay, I'm not willing to spend that extra money that could go to food or souvenirs on my trip, just on transportation.
Yeah, because when we talk about the prices for things on a Disney vacation, you have to sort of price those things out. What is worth it to you? So for you, it is worth it to maybe spend a little more money and stay on property than to stay off property. But I do have a lot of experience staying off property, first as a vacationer, but now as somebody who lives in the area. A lot of the times it doesn't make sense to get a Walt Disney World hotel when I can get something cheaper right off property, and I'm going to be parking for free because I have my annual pass and things like that. So there are definitely multiple tiers of off-property sites. One, and this is what I would recommend the most if you're willing to spend a little bit more money, but you don't want to spend Walt Disney World money, and that is the Universal on-property resorts are amazing. Even their values, like Cabana Bay, Endless Summer, both dockside and surfside, those are both amazing resorts, and I would 100% recommend them to anybody looking to maybe have that Disneyfied experience, but do it for just a little bit better price. Now, remember, if you do that, you get the free transportation to the Universal parks, but you're still doing an Uber or something like that to get to the Walt Disney World parks. You just have to keep that in mind. Then when it comes to some of the other off-property hotels, there's some in the Disney Springs area that are really nice and might even come with some of the perks from staying on an on-property hotel. And then there's 192. And 192 can be really hit or miss. You can find some really nice hotels. You can find some that are maybe a little bit sketchy. Over to International Drive, which again is a little closer to Universal, where you start finding maybe some nicer ones again. But that's when you have to start looking out for things like resort fees and some added costs that you might think you're saving, but in the long run, you're not. Because if you can stay at All-Star Movies for $200 a night and you find $140 a night place off property, if they have a $40 resort fee and you have to pay $40 in Uber, you may as well have just stayed at All-Star Movies the whole time, right? So I think that is definitely something to consider. Now, since I just mentioned some of the values and you have stayed at some of the value resorts, what goes into the decision-making process when you're picking maybe to stay at a value instead of a moderate or a deluxe?
Well, I mean, the values are the cheapest resorts, so that's always a nice plus to them. But also, things like the length of the trip, how often I plan to be at the hotel. And a newish one for me that I've had to bring into consideration is if I'll be working at all from my hotel room. The value resorts don't have the most reliable internet connection. So if I'm planning to work, automatically that category's out. However, if I'm going for a trip where I'm planning to be at the parks open to close and I'm just going to be riding rides and doing park things all day, those value resorts are a great place to stay because they're comfortable, they're safe, they're clean, and while they don't have a ton of amenities, if you don't plan on spending a whole lot of time there, you don't really miss out on them.
Yeah, exactly. I often talk about my vacation with my wife, Courtney, back in 2018 when we still lived in Arizona and we took a week-long vacation to Walt Disney World. And while I don't think we thought it was going to be like a once-in-a-lifetime vacation, we certainly didn't think that within a year of that trip, we were going to be living 2 hours away from Walt Disney World. So we were planning on hitting the parks hard. We were rope drop to goodnight kiss almost every day of that vacation. And sometimes I had a little more stamina than Courtney had. So I would do rope drop to goodnight kiss, but maybe she wanted to head back to the resort before extra magic hours. So we got to take advantage of the perks that existed for staying on property. And I'll admit, there were more perks to staying on property back then. We had free Magical Express. We could book fast passes 60 days in advance. But in addition to that, when Courtney decided she was too tired, she could just get on a bus and go back to All Star Movies. Now, we didn't have to get a moderate or a deluxe resort to take advantage of those Disney amenities, but we also knew that we were only spending sometimes 7, 8 hours in the hotel per day, and we didn't necessarily need to pay Grand Floridian prices for that. Now, what are your thoughts on the value resorts when it comes to a Run Disney vacation? I think both of us have sort of backed off of Run Disney for a while, but that can be a time when I think that the value resorts make a little bit of sense because you get that same Disney transportation, but you might be sleeping a lot more. You might be getting to the resort earlier at night, and it doesn't matter if you're at Wilderness Lodge and they have Territory Lounge open until 10 o'clock at night because you're going to bed at 7:30 because you have to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning to go run. So some of the amenities not being there can actually be a little bit of a benefit to the values when it comes to stuff like Run Disney.
I will say that's absolutely correct. And I have stayed at Pop Century for Run Disney races before and have had zero problems. My one sort of caveat to that is if you are doing a race weekend where you're running multiple races and you really need to be like in bed at like 8 o'clock and you need to be getting that sleep and that rest, sometimes the value resorts are not the best place for that since all the doors are outdoor facing doors. They don't have like internal hallways and corridors. So there can be some noise from families with young children who are just enjoying their time. You know, it's not a bad thing, it's not excessive noise. But if you're in a room near a pool or something like that, you might have some, laughter and things like that coming into your room until like 10 o'clock at night. And if you're really trying to zone out into deep, deep sleep for, 3 nights in a row, starting at 7, 8 o'clock, you might not be able to get that.
And we are not just being childless Disney adults complaining about kids. That is not it at all. It is a good point that you make that sometimes the All Stars, Pop Century, even Art of Animation, these resorts can be loud later because maybe at some of the higher end resorts, people are turning in a little earlier, or maybe they're still at the parks, or maybe they are down at the lounge, but that's not affecting you in your room. Whereas if people are still out at the pool at 10 o'clock, you're hearing them in some of these value resorts. Yeah, I didn't think about that. That is a really good point. I know you mentioned Pop Century and I just mentioned Art of Animation. Those are the two value resorts that are on the Skyliner. Has the addition of the Disney Skyliner, which will take you to Hollywood Studios or Epcot, has that increased the odds that you will stay at a value?
Absolutely. Pop Century has become my go-to resort for when I plan a trip. I think, for what I typically need in a trip, the amenities are great. And then you bring in that Skyliner where you can just hop on this really cool, kind of exciting mode of transportation to get to Hollywood Studios and Epcot. And you don't have to worry about waiting in line for a bus. You don't have to worry about, at the end of the day, your feet are tired and now you're standing for a 20-minute bus ride. just hop on that Skyliner, breeze through the sky, and you're back at your resort. It is so convenient.
And then I know you have a couple favorite moderate resorts. So as we move up to the next level, I know you've been enjoying lately Coronado Springs, and this is a moderate resort that can almost get into the deluxe territory when you start talking about Grand Destino Tower. But this is a resort that has amazing food. There's Toledo, there's Three Bridges, there's a sports bar there, Rick's Sports Bar. If you, not me, Rick's, RIX, if you are just trying to figure out where you're going to watch the game, I think Disney needs to create some more places like Rick's, honestly, because now that ESPN Zone at the Boardwalk Resort isn't there anymore, there's no place to like watch the game. But Coronado Springs is a really, really popular place. I'll go there just to hang out for the day because there's a lot of parking. You don't get hassled like you get hassled at some of the other resorts for parking because it is created to be a convention resort. The pools are top notch. The tower is gorgeous and has lounges in it and has a coffee bar. And there's artwork from Dolly, and there are a lot of tributes to Walt Disney. But the one drawback to it is huge. So you might be 2 or 3 miles away from somebody else if you don't coordinate where you're going to be located in the resort.
Yeah, this is definitely become one of my go-to moderates, especially for a race weekend. It's very quiet, but it, like you said, the food, everything, it's so great. I've been fortunate enough to be in a room that is very close to the main bus stop, and I've also been in rooms at all the way in the back corner of the resort, at like the last bus stop. And honestly, it seems like it's larger than it is. Um, the addition of the bridges across the lagoon in the middle of the resort has made such a huge difference because now you don't have to walk all the way around. If you want to get somewhere, you can take a bridge and kind of cut your travel time in thirds. Um, so it is one of those resorts that I think gets overlooked a lot because people see it as just a convention resort and they think like, oh, well, what, it's a business resort. I'm not going to stay there. But it has top-notch theming that, again, you might not expect for something that is kind of pushed as a business resort. And now that they have that Grand Destino Tower, it really does feel like you're getting deluxe amenities at a better price.
And I know sometimes families steer clear of this resort because of it having that convention reputation. But honestly, with the pools that they have there, your kid is going to lose their mind over these pools. They're amazing. The one with the Mexican pyramid is awe-inspiring. Just like really great Disney theming that you're getting at a resort that is a moderate, so it's not even supposed to be themed as well as some of the deluxe resorts, but it does get that theming.
And I really do think it has the best food in all the moderate resorts because, again, it's a convention hotel. So they have people coming in who really don't know anything about Disney or don't do anything with Disney just to come stay at that resort for business conferences. So they really have to show their A game with food to keep all these people happy. And it is top notch food. The burger at Three Bridges is one of my favorites on all of Disney World property. And like, I love my burgers. This is high praise. It is fantastic food.
Yeah, I actually haven't had the chance to get to Three Bridges yet. It is on my list and one that I know we definitely want to hit at some point soon. I find myself when I'm there either going for, I got the reservation at Toledo and I want to do a fancier meal, or I end up going to Rick's a lot. I really like Rick's. That also has a great, at least I have to get the veggie burger. It has a great veggie burger there. It is a nice atmosphere. You can sit there, you can talk, have conversations where it's a little more laid back than some of the other restaurants. But Three Bridges, I have heard, especially from you, is one that I want to hit sometime really soon.
We should go.
Okay, first of all, that is definitely happening the next time you come down here. That's where we're going to leave things off in today's conversation. Maz will be back on the show in 2 weeks to continue talking about the different resorts on Walt Disney World property. Next week, I'll be joined by a dude from Diz Twitter who has always been supportive of the show. Main Street Electrical Arcade is his Twitter moniker, and he has some Disney knowledge that isn't my specialty, mostly Disney video games. We will cover a few topics when he's on the show. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. We're starting to get some trolls and bots in the comments section, which is great because it helps boost engagement. These are obviously not real accounts. That being said, we would much rather actual interactions with real people. Always feel free to comment with positive stuff, like our videos. We've been a little stagnant with our subscriber growth, so please help us there. You will not be disappointed with everything we have going on with the YouTube channel. Earlier this week, it was the 26th anniversary of Disney's Animal Kingdom. Of course, I was on hand to share some of the day. There are multiple videos from Epcot's International Flower and Garden Festival. We try to bring you dining reviews. I go to theme parks, baseball games, and so much more. This has been episode 169 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. We will be back next Thursday with another brand new episode. Until then, have a great week.